Good afternoon, everyone, also from my side. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to this focus session. I hope you can hear me well. Um, so in my presentation, I'm going to be talking about the proposed cross-currency settlement model for all the TIPS hosted currencies, focusing in particular on some functional and technical dimensions. So starting already with the next slide, the idea here is to refer to a specific initiative that falls under the change request TIPS 65. This is the regular change and management process we have in TIPS in order to introduce new features. And in particular, with this change request, we are introducing what we defined the enhanced link transaction settlement model. What does it mean in practice? It's a settlement model through which, for all the transactions involving TIPS hosted currencies, we ensure complete end-to-end instantaneity of settlement by splitting the end-to-end cross-currency transaction into two single currency legs, which are settled individually following a payment versus payment approach, meaning that either both of them will be settled or none of them will be settled in order to avoid credit risk. So this model offers, in particular, to the payer the certainty that the funds are going to be delivered to the ultimate beneficiary if everything goes well along the chain in a matter of seconds. And therefore, it is optimizing a bit the concept of the one leg out flow, in which settlement occurs on the two involved jurisdictions in a strict sequence, one after the other. And ultimately, the model will be also based on the same message schema definitions that are designed under the perimeter of the one leg out functionality that is specifically developed for the euro, but our message experts extended a bit the logic in order to be currency neutral. So in a way that can be used also for the non-euro currencies hosted in TIPS right now. In the second, I think the next slide, we are deep diving into the initial stages of the payment generation. And here I'm describing a bit what is going to happen in the customer to PSP space. This is a bit outside the inter-PSP domain, which is relevant for the CSM, but still, in order to set the expectation, it's important to define what are the fields that would be required in order to create a well-formed cross-currency message into TIPS. So for this reason, the payer, first of all, should trigger a cross-currency payment initiation by selecting an amount and a target currency. This step would entail some exchange rate negotiation, for example, between the originating PSP and the selected intermediary who is supposed to offer some rates for the specific corridor. And upon confirmation from the payer, the originating PSP will submit the transaction to TIPS. So it will formally send a PAX8 in a, let's say, specific format that I will describe a bit later on. And in the next slide, you can see say, a list of fields, and here you can recognize some of the fields which are already there in the domestic transaction, but some other, they are not part of the EPC SEPA credit transfer, or not even at the moment in the Nordic credit transfer instant. But those fields are required in order to have a successful end-to-end settlement between different jurisdictions. So first of all, instead of one single amount and currency, we would need two fields. One for the source currency and a second one for the amount in the destination currency. And on top of that, there will be an additional tag reporting the FX rate that should be applicable for that specific transaction. Furthermore, the intermediaries will play a key role for the end-to-end settlement, because the debtor agent and the creditor agent will report respectively the PSPs managing the accounts of the payer and the payee, so in two different jurisdictions, whereas the two intermediaries, following the naming convention of the one leg out scheme produced by the EPC, we talk about exit leg PSP or entry leg PSP in the corresponding currencies. Those are the actors who are on one end receiving funds in the source currency, and in the other jurisdiction providing funds in the target currency to the ultimate beneficiary. There are some technical fields required just to have a smooth management of the end-to-end flow. And here in particular, we had to introduce a specific clearing system code just to mark the direction of the transaction. Because according to the implementation guidelines that we used as a reference, we built a superset of XSDs, including, let's say, both directions, either outbound from one currency to the other, and also inbound direction for the destination currency who is receiving the cross-currency payment. So for this reason, the clearing system code is in a way driving the system to take the appropriate decision when a cross-currency payment lands on the system. Moving ahead, here you can find a visual representation of the full model that we proposed with the CR TIPS 65, mainly to explain the pillars behind this model. We have, let's say, an end-to-end transaction, as I mentioned, that is split into two sub-transactions, each of them treated as a single currency transaction. There is an orchestration required when moving the payment from, let's say here, the blue part to the yellow part of the diagram. So the two components which are dealing with the settlement of the specific currency, they need to talk with each other to make sure that as a basic functionality, the payment that is crossing the jurisdiction is following the rules which are expected on the other side in terms of ISO 20022 messages. So the main difference here compared to the one leg out is the fact that the payments would entail a reservation of funds on both jurisdictions, and only after the ultimate beneficiary confirms the willingness of settling the transaction, the two sub-transactions will be settled in a all or nothing mode. That's why you can see step 9 here in this diagram is replicated a number of times, just to explain that all these steps are simultaneous, are managed in a simultaneous way. Moving to the next slide, just focus on how the liquidity will be transferred along the chain, because this is of course just an example, taking as a scenario a euro payment targeting a Swedish krona beneficiary. So in that case, you can see the transaction is split into two different legs. One that is transferring funds from the debiting account to the account of the intermediary on the euro side, and another transaction still in TIPS, moving funds from the intermediary on Swedish krona side to the ultimate beneficiary. Some realignment in terms of liquidity would be necessary just for the two intermediaries to exchange funds with each other. So there should be an agreement between them in order to make sure that this transaction can be settled effectively. The next slide, I think I mentioned already this need to orchestrate the two transactions. And I mentioned also at the very beginning the reference to enhanced link transaction model. So you may wonder, enhanced compare what? Basically, this model is coming from a further refinement of a previous model that was called simply link transaction model, that was leaving to the cross-currency PSP the role of orchestrating, let's say, out of band, out of the system itself, the two legs of the end-to-end transaction. We try to reduce a bit the complexity, concentrating this function into a specific component within TIPS, and this is especially working very fast for the TIPS hosted currency, but nothing prevents to reuse the same component also for the interlinking between TIPS and other systems. And in very simple words, this is a kind of mapping table that is going to be introduced in TIPS, just to make sure that whatever is not present at the level of the messages can be derived from the mapping table in order to, let's say, bridge the gap between the two systems. What type of gap can be there in the system or in the message? Sorry. Well, first of all, according to the one leg out scheme, if you look at the various tags, one of the two intermediaries, in particular the entry leg PSP, so the intermediary in the destination jurisdiction, is an optional field. So in theory, the message can be sent to the CSM without that information. But still, when it comes to the settlement layer, TIPS would need this type of information in order to transfer the funds, as I described before, from the entry leg PSP to the ultimate beneficiary. And that's how we control this gap and let's say we fill the missing information. This is one aspect, of course. There is another point that will be relevant for the mapping table, which is the selection of the settlement model. Because as you may know, and Dimitri also mentioned in his presentation before, via the phase approach, we are going to introduce the one leg out settlement flow already in June next year, which means, for example, a pair of currencies can be let's say used to trigger a cross-currency payment already since June. When the enhanced link transaction model will enter into force, there should be a decision whether moving the corridors into this mapping table. Of course, all the TIPS hosted currencies will be the first candidates to be part of the mapping table. So for example, Euro versus DKK or DKK versus SEK will be captured in the mapping table. And that is what exactly I was referring to. So the mapping table will have as a first role a decision point where the payment will be settled according to the one leg out scheme. For example, if no row is matching the pair of currency in the message by looking into the mapping table, or to go via the enhanced link transaction model, as I will explain let's say, in the next slide. But before going to the examples, maybe it's just good to have a visual representation on how the TIPS mapping table will look like. Besides a number of technical fields that I will not describe in much detail, of course, we would need some distinguished name and some network provider information just to allow the transfer of the messages from one component to the other. What is really relevant in terms of cross-currency settlement are the two parts on the left and right-hand side of the table. On the left-hand side, as I mentioned, there is a first step of validation, just checking whether the pair of currencies, which is there in the payment message, can be settled through the enhanced link transaction model. Secondly, if there is a gap of information in the message, and here I'm referring to the entry leg PSP, which is not present in the message, then the system will look for a match between the entry leg PSP and the exit leg PSP that we can find in the message, because the latter is a mandatory field according to the one leg out scheme. So to give you an example with the first scenario in the next slide, if we have a cross-currency transaction between Swedish krona and euro, you can see a very compact representation of this message on the left-hand side. Basically, we have four players. We have the originator and the beneficiary PSP. Then we have what are defined as instructing agent and instructed agent in the message. The first one, the instructed agent is mandatory, whereas the instructing is optional. But still, there might be cases where the instructing agent is there in the message since the beginning, because the originator PSP received from his counterpart, from his intermediary, the information. So if we have such type of information, we will simply look up for the currency pair in the mapping table to make a decision on the settlement model. But we don't need to verify whether there is a specific row mapping the entry and the exit leg PSP. So for this scenario, it's sufficient to go through the step one to make the appropriate decision. The mapping function will simply do some basic transformation of the messages. As you may notice, the message on the right-hand side is the one that should pop up in the destination jurisdiction. And one thing to notice is that the two currencies are swapped simply because the settlement layer will always look in order to set the single currency sub-transaction to a specific field. That's why this swap is required. But besides this, there is no gap to fill in the message. We can have already all the debiting and crediting side information to settle the transaction. The next example, this is a bit more complex. In the next slide, we have same scenario in terms of pair of currencies, but the instructing agent field is not informed since the beginning. And this is possible due to the optional tag defined at the level of PAX8. So the first step will exactly look like as I described before. So by finding the currency pair SEK and euro in the mapping table, this will lead the system to process the instant payment cross currency according to the enhanced link transaction model. But in order to do so, there will be an additional piece of information, which is the entry leg PSP. And this can be derived through a second access into the mapping table. And as you can see here, there is a match between the exit leg PSP present in the message and a given entry leg PSP. So what the mapping function will do is simply to use this entry leg PSP when the payment on the destination currency is generated internally. And this will be the intermediary to whom the PAX8 will be sent for acceptance before triggering the whole process on the destination currency. I think we reach with the next slide the end of my presentation, and I just wanted to convey the message that in general for tips for any release we publish, besides the user detail functional specification, also all the XSDs, the schema definition for the XMLs into my standard repository. And for cross currencies, we made even an exception. So we anticipated a bit the publication of those messages. So if you log in into my standard and you look for the version XCY of PAX8, PAX2, and PAX28, you will see exactly how the XSDs are structured, all the usage guidelines, and you can make comparisons, for example, between the domestic flow and the cross-currency flow.